This is the CBS Evening News.
Good evening. I'm Evan Smith. Today, major U.S. corporations lined up behind the opening to Cuba. MasterCard, Cisco, Marriott, Pepsi, Caterpillar, and Major League Baseball expressed interest in doing business there. It won't happen right away, but the Cubans we talked to today are just as eager in terms of American relations. It's been 54 years that they've been frozen in time. Scott Pelley reports from Havana.
For all any Cuban can tell, Detroit hasn't made a car since 1961. Chevys and Fords, familiar to Eisenhower and Sinatra, live forever.
Congress slapped the trade embargo on Cuba in 1960, and only Congress can lift it. Today, some members said they will try to keep that from happening. Here's Nancy Cordes.
This is the kind of deal you get when you send your speechwriter to negotiate with a tyrant.
Republican Senator Marco Rubio took his opposition to Miami today, where he was joined by a group of Cuban Americans.
And what if Congress does lift the embargo? Vicente Arenas in Miami looks at the prospect for American businesses.
For hotel chains, it is considered a game changer. If millions of tourists flock to Cuba, they'll need places to stay, and American companies are eager to build.
The White House is considering its response to the hack attack on Sony Pictures Entertainment. Bob Orr has the latest on the investigation of who was behind it.
Officials inside the Obama administration are still wrestling over whether or when to publicly accuse North Korea of orchestrating the massive hack of Sony Pictures Entertainment.
Critics of Sony's decision to pull the interview say that it sets a dangerous precedent and that giving in to threats will have a chilling effect on Hollywood. Here's John Blackstone.
By canceling showings of the interview, theater chains and Sony have angered and disappointed both moviegoers and those who make movies.
Look at this. Kim Jong-un wants to do an interview with Dave Skylark?
On Hollywood Boulevard today, film fans condemned the decision.
Gasoline in Cuba cost about $3 US a gallon. In the United States, it fell another 2 cents overnight to a nationwide average of $2.48. And oil is down to just over $54. We're looking at the impact of falling fuel prices around the U.S. Tonight, Manuel Bojorquez is in New Orleans.
The sparks are still flying for Louisiana companies that make equipment for the oil industry, but the outlook has started to dim.
Today, National Geographic named its photos of the year. We want to share a few. This one captured tigers squaring off in India. In Canada, a wild owl checks for danger. These birds flew over houses destroyed in Syria's civil war. And this picture of a packed train in Hong Kong was the grand prize winner. And that's it for the CBS Evening News tonight. For all of us at CBS News and all around the world, I'm Evan Smith in New York. Good night.
This is the CBS Evening News.
Good evening. Private information about millions of Americans is in the hands of cyber thieves tonight. They broke into a database at the country's second largest health insurer. It's called Anthem, and it runs Blue Cross Blue Shield plans in more than a dozen states. The company says that the database contains 80 million records, including names, birthdays, and social security numbers. A goldmine for identity thieves and con artists. It is not known if the hackers got health records. Chris Van Cleef begins our coverage.
Anthem was one of thousands of healthcare companies warned twice last year by the FBI that their industry was particularly vulnerable to hackers. In 2014, there were 42 cyber attacks targeting health providers.
Chris Van Cleef reporting. In another hacking casualty today, Amy Pascal announced her resignation as co-chair of Sony Pictures. Perhaps the most powerful woman in Hollywood, Pascal saw her sensitive emails about stars and President Obama dumped into public view. The FBI says the hack came from North Korea, which was angered by a Sony movie about the assassination of its dictator. Tonight, European leaders and Secretary of State John Kerry are in Ukraine to stop a revolution. The White House is considering sending weapons to Ukraine to fight the rebels in the eastern part of the country who are backed by Russia. Elizabeth Palmer discovered what the Ukrainians are up against.
To the Ukrainian army, this road is everything right now. It's their only supply line to the epicenter of heavy fighting, where they're under blistering attack from Russian-backed separatists.
We've learned tonight that the Jordanian Air Force pilot who was executed by being burned alive most likely ejected from his plane after he was shot down accidentally by his own wingman. Charlie D'Agata in Jordan reports the kingdom has launched a wave of retaliation against the Islamic extremists known as ISIS.
Jordan launched its most punishing air assault yet on suspected ISIS targets near the terror group's Syrian stronghold of Raqqa.
Today, the final chapter in the story of Navy SEAL Chris Kyle began to be written in a Texas courtroom. Kyle is portrayed in the blockbuster movie American Sniper. Mark Strassman is covering the trial of the man accused of Kyle's murder.
Sniper Chris Kyle was called the Devil of Ramadi by Iraqi insurgents. Kyle had 160 confirmed kills, the most in U.S. military history.
Mark Strassman reporting. Pope Francis is about to make history. Today, he accepted an invitation to address Congress in September. The Pope also made a confession in a Google Hangout with kids from around the world. He admitted he has no idea how to use a computer. That's no sin. Computers have brought lesser men to their knees. Which brings us to the company that helped start the personal computing era. Radio Shack couldn't keep up with the revolution. It filed for bankruptcy today. It's closing 2,400 stores. In the markets, the Dow was up more than 211. The S&P 21. That puts them in positive territory for the year. A lot of people consider high school and college to be the best years of their lives. So we were surprised that a new survey finds high school seniors aren't having the fun their parents did. Ben Tracy tells us why.
I would say we're a pretty stressed out generation.
Ryan Stybor is 18, a senior in high school in Simi Valley, California. She's in the drama club and taking 6 advanced placement classes. She's applied to 8 colleges.
Ben Tracy reporting. San Francisco is losing a big part of its history. Crews this week began tearing down Candlestick Park, where the Giants' Willie Mays and the 49ers' Joe Montana made so many memories. Demolition will take a few months. Oscar De La Hoya was once boxing's most prolific fighter, with his boyish looks, fan-friendly fighting style, and his ability to sell fights. But now he's been able to sell fights outside the ring with his company Golden Boy. We caught up with him to discuss future bouts and boxing's promotional landscape. Negotiations for what has been deemed the Super Bowl of boxing between superstars Floyd Mayweather and Manny Pacquiao has hit a standstill. Talks for the mega bout have been on and off for the last 6 years, with each time proving to be a failure. We caught up with a few trainers and boxers for their insight and predictions on the situation. We'll be right back. For much of his life, Robert Barron used his special skills to make someone look like someone else. Now he's using those same skills to make someone look like himself again. Here's Juliana Goldman.
Wow.
Voila.
That is so cool.
To the naked eye, it's nearly impossible to tell what has this 12-year-old so excited. For the first time in his life, Eric Brenner has looked in the mirror and seen himself with a right ear.
It's just gonna go like that.
Oh, that's really awesome. Yeah, even I can't tell.
That's the ultimate measure of success for Robert Barron, the man who designed Eric's prosthetic.
And that's the CBS Evening News for tonight. I'm Evan Smith. Good night. Today, as investigators look for clues to why Andres Lubitz deliberately flew a jetliner into a mountain, they found something else, a note that could have prevented it. And at the crashing in the French Alps, crews continue the difficult task of recovering remains of the 150 who died. We have a series of reports. First, Alan Pizzi in the co-pilot's hometown.
Investigators searching the apartment and family home of Andreas Lubitz turned up several doctor's notes, including one excusing him from work on the day of the crash.
Now to the search for the remains of those victims. Elizabeth Palmer is on the scene.
French police mountaineers helped forensic specialists comb the crash site today. They've now gathered hundreds of body parts for identification, marked on the slope with red flags.
Late today, Italy's highest court overturned the murder convictions of American Amanda Knox and her ex-boyfriend. The two were accused of killing a fellow student in 2007. Convicted once, they were acquitted on appeal, then convicted a second time. Today's action closes the case for good. Knox, now 27, is back home in Washington State. 2 people are missing following a gas explosion in New York City yesterday. 24 hours later, the ruins were still smoldering. 4 buildings were damaged or destroyed. Nearly 24 people were hurt. Officials say the explosion may have been caused by a worker improperly tapping the gas line. There is a growing backlash against a law signed yesterday by the governor of Indiana. Supporters of the law say it protects religious freedom, while the opponents say it legalizes discrimination. Here's Adriana Diaz.
This is really about limiting the authority of the government to intrude upon the religious freedom of every Hoosier of every faith.
Governor Mike Pence signed the Religious Freedom Bill that protects individuals and businesses from government interference when following their religious beliefs.
Adriana Diaz reporting. Senate Democratic leader Harry Reid announced today he will not run for a 6th term. Reid is 75 and still recovering from injuries after he fell while exercising. He lost the majority leadership position when the Republicans took back the Senate. Chuck Schumer of New York is likely to succeed Reid as Democratic leader. Overseas, Yemen is becoming the main front in a battle between the 2 main factions of Islam. Today, forces led by the Sunni Kingdom of Saudi Arabia accelerated their attack on Shiite rebels who are backed by Iran. More now from David Martin.
Arab warplanes dropped hundreds of bombs on rebel targets in Yemen in an air campaign that dwarfs the bombing of ISIS in Iraq and Syria.
David Martin reporting. While the U.S. is backing Sunni Arabs in Yemen, in Iraq, it's fighting on the same side as Shiite militias who've been helping the Iraqi army, which is trying to kick ISIS out of Tikrit. Holly Williams is following this.
U.S.-led airstrikes targeted ISIS fighting positions around Tikrit, which was captured by the extremists in June. The strikes were requested by Iraq's government, after Iraqi leaders earlier said they didn't need U.S. help to win back the city. Instead, Iraq turned to military advisors from Iran to help its fighting force of more than 20,000 men.
Scientists tap into an ancient scourge for a new cancer treatment. And an astronaut begins a historic journey when the CBS Evening News continues. And that's the CBS Evening News for tonight. Until next time, I'm Evan Smith. Good night.